So I think we're going to go ahead and get started. I am Leanne West, and I'm the Chief Engineer of Pediatric Technology at Georgia Tech. And we have our Tech Talk webinar series. It comes around once every 3 months or so. And today we are really excited to have Erin Keller from the Georgia Tech Foundation Venture Fund. And so, Erin, I'm going to let you introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you guys for being here. I think mostly new faces to me or new little blobs on my screen. Hi, Judd. Nice to see you. I'm Erin. I just a little background on myself. So I grew up in Atlanta, went to Georgia Tech. I graduated undergrad biomedical engineering in 2011. Spent a couple years here. I worked for a venture studio called the Innovation Factory. It doesn't exist anymore. It was a really cool first job. So for those who don't know what venture studios are, basically a small team of folks who are starting and running companies. Our venture studio was focused on medical device innovation. So I think over the course of the studio existed for maybe 15 years, started 11 or so companies. Was there for 4 or 5 years. The companies that we started, at least the successful ones, eventually went on to get venture funding. So that was my first exposure to the other side of the table. And after doing the startup thing for a couple years, the other side started to look pretty interesting. Was lucky enough to get myself a job out in the Bay Area in early 2017. And I have been an investor ever since. Right now, my job is, as Leanne mentioned, I run the fund that we operate out of Georgia Tech. It specifically sits up with the Georgia Tech Foundation. And over the past decade, like I said, I spent most of my time out in the Bay Area, spent most of my time working for a fund called GTF Ventures on their deep tech team, early stage deep tech team. So while I love innovation, I think deep tech is probably where I'd say my passion is. So Georgia Tech is a good place to be for that.
Absolutely, it is. Yeah, that's really cool. And so, can you tell us a little bit about what the foundation does in investing?
Yeah, so the fund, as Leanne mentioned, is called GTF Ventures. We do have a website if anyone was interested to check it out. If you Google GTF Ventures, I think it shows up first or second. So the fund has been around since 2022. We currently manage just over $20 million. So our goal and our job is to invest capital into the best companies coming out of Georgia Tech. And if you take a look at our fund, you'll see that we have a couple of, it's essentially a family of funds, and all of the funds have slightly different focus areas. The two core funds, the first is the eligibility criteria is that you had to have gone through a CreateX program on campus. So for those who are not familiar, CreateX is the entrepreneurial teaching organization on campus that kind of culminates in a summer accelerator program called Launch. So one of our funds is focused around founders who are coming out of that program or have taken one of the classes that CreateX offers on campus. Largely an undergraduate focus, although CreateX is available to anyone on campus. And then our second core fund is for IP spinouts. So the eligibility criteria there is that you have licensed IP from Georgia Tech. So this is mostly the stuff coming from our PhDs, faculty members, researchers, et cetera. We invest early. I think, our job is to, if we're doing our job right, is to see things first. We're on campus. We should have that unique advantage to find things before others do. I think for us, that also makes sense given that the fund is fairly small. I think for us to, have a shot at returning capital and continuing to support more founders, it behooves us to get in early. In terms of, how we deploy capital. So we write checks of 25K to 250K. Right now, we don't lead deals, meaning that for companies that are going out to fundraise, we do require that you have another investor who's come in to kind of set the price on your round. So we're what's called like a syndicate partner or a follow-on investor. And then from a thesis perspective, we are agnostic, meaning we will look at everything. And if you take a look at our website, all of our portfolio companies are listed. For both of our funds, it's a little bit of a lot. A lot of deep tech in there, particularly from our IP portfolio. From our CreateX portfolio, it's even more broad. We've got consumer, life sciences, defense tech, you name it. There's probably a little bit of it somewhere represented in the portfolio.
Very cool. And so I know CreateX was originally for students, but faculty can go through that program now too. So you'll really look at any opportunity for somebody on campus, whether it's undergrad, graduate, or faculty.
Yes, yes. I think the hole that we have right now that we are actively working to cover is that we cannot invest in alumni companies that either unless they happen to have Georgia Tech IP or they went through CreateX while they were on campus.
Okay.
Hopefully that hole will be solved soon because it's a fairly large hole. We of course have thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of alums kind of out there. But yes, right now we we're investing in anyone who's gone through a CreateX program or has Georgia Tech IP.
Okay, good to know. And so tell me about maybe what you look for in a company as an early stage investor. What's important to you?
Yeah. So and this is true for, I think every early investor kind of has their own level of, what they consider most important to kind of least important. But I think by and large, early investors, almost all early investors are very, very focused on the team. And I think if you think about it, kind of makes sense given that the earlier a company is, kind of the less meat the actual company has to it. They maybe have an
Yeah.
MVP, maybe they're not even at MVP stage, they probably don't have revenue, and so there's more weight on the team, the vision, the problem they've identified, and so that's so we spend a lot of time trying to get to know founders. Do we buy into their vision? Do we think they've identified a unique problem? Are they uniquely qualified to solve that problem? And then, depending on how far they are with their, building out a solution to the problem, digging into that as well. But, for us, I think most of our companies are probably in the pre-revenue stage. So, very little focus, I think, on, things like financial projections and all of that. So yeah, certainly looking for, strong teams solving interesting problems. I think, like any venture investor that is expecting a return, the market has to be fairly sizable. I think most investors will look at all of their investments as having the potential to return the fund, meaning if we're a $20 million fund, we want all of our investments to credibly be able to return that $20 million or more back to the fund. And that's usually some kind of, squishy math based on, starting from, the total market size.
Okay. And so for people who may not know what an MVP is, that's a
Mhm.
minimum viable product. Can you explain just briefly what that is to people?
Yeah, so minimum viable product is, and so this is just like my take on it. And I'm sure if you Google it, it'll probably be something different. But is something that you can get out into the market that is solving like a singular problem. So I think especially a lot of really smart folks in university environments, maybe want to get something to like, perfect level that's solving a bunch of problems. And I think an MVP is just, hey, I've built something that is good enough to get out into the market that someone can start testing. Maybe it doesn't solve all of their problems, it solves one problem, or it's something that you can kind of get out there for a customer to start giving you feedback. And I think the earlier you can get something out there and start getting feedback, the better, because you may think you have discovered the right problem or you're working towards the right solution, but until you actually have folks that are testing it and using it in their own environments, you don't really know. So that's my definition of MVP.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. And one of the things that we do in the Pediatric Innovation Network, when we have our faculty members and students work with clinicians to come up with solutions, we really try to make sure that those clinicians are included the whole way through so that you're building something that has a real world purpose and is going to fit into their workflow and you're going to give them exactly what they need. So that is one thing that we really try to make sure that happens in what we do. And so if you have, let's say some of the people on the line might have a startup, might be looking for funding, what kind of advice would you give them about what they might want to think about?
Yeah, and I'm happy to talk to anybody about this personally at any time. But I think things to think about, I think starting with a pitch deck, being able to credibly tell your story. Again, kind of some of the things that I mentioned, the problem you're solving, the market, kind of who you are, why you're the right person to solve the problem. Thinking about as you go out to raise capital, you're of course going to be going, or you should be going to the market with a specific ask. So what's the rationale behind that ask? I think for early companies, typically you are raising capital for anywhere from 12 to 24 months. And as you think about within 12 to 24 months, what are key milestones that you are looking to accomplish with that capital? And so you kind of figure out your capital raise based on milestones and timing. And then in terms of, going to the market, I think there's a lot of people, I think Georgia Tech is a very well-connected place. I think, I have investor connections, other folks do as well. I think there's a lot of people, especially for first-time founders, that want to help if they can. One of the things I always say is most people are well-intentioned, but unless you make it easy for them to help, they probably won't. And so for me, what that looks like, because I get a lot of requests for folks to help me, or to send messages to folks, investors in my network. Hey, I have this interesting company. Do you want to take a look? Kind of thing. And so for me, I always ask founders, hey, send me an email blurb, put your deck, link your deck in there, send me a list of your key investor or your, target investors. So kind of like do some homework so that you can make it super streamlined for anybody that you're asking for help from. I find that I'm a lot more helpful when people make it easy for me. And I think most of the folks in your network will probably be as well. And then another thing to kind of keep in mind is I think most founders, or at least the advice that most founders will get, is to kind of think about your how you tackle investors in kind of a tiered approach. So you typically don't want to go pitch your like most ideal investor, whoever that is, A16Z, Sequoia, maybe some smaller investor, that's perfect for your thesis. Like that probably shouldn't be your first pitch or even your 10th pitch unless you're super solid and you're sure that your pitch is hitting. And so I think usually the advice is, start with kind of what you would consider your tier threes. Maybe it's slightly off thesis, or they're, maybe they're not exactly the right stage for you, or however you want to define kind of like your tiers. But I think, getting some reps in, getting some practice, seeing like what kind of questions you're getting, revising your deck, revising your pitch, all that kind of stuff before you get to like your tier one, your ideal investors is usually a good approach.
Absolutely. Definitely practice helps. And again, hearing those questions that investors ask, it may be things that you've never thought about
Mhm.
that are really important to include. So I think that's great. And so you talked about your network of investors. Um, do you, I'm sure you work within the Atlanta ecosystem and some other groups, whether it's investing
Mhm.
or not. What are the resources do you find helpful around Atlanta for startups?
Yeah. So I think there's probably a lot of resources that I am not even aware of yet. It's a little bit surprising how I think there's a lot of support in the ecosystem. I think there's some work to maybe be done for there to be more kind of crosstalk about like how to make sure that we're supporting our founders in the most appropriate way by, making sure that we're making the right connections at the right time. I think for Georgia Tech founders, particularly like on campus, I think CreateX is a great resource, particularly for first-time founders who are just trying to like, understand what does it mean to be an entrepreneur? Like, how do I do customer discovery? Like that kind of like early stuff. For folks on the faculty side, there's of course Quadrant I. They're there to help with similar things, and then also grant writing and all of that kind of stuff. Um, for companies that are maybe a little bit more mature, we have there's ATDC. I'm trying to think of if I even know what the acronym stands for. So they have a bunch of mentors who are industry specific, and real estate. They have space in Tech Square. So they have companies kind of come in, they receive mentorship. They're part of, a cohort of, or a group of other founders. So, just getting to talk to other founders, which I think if you're kind of going through this journey, it can be incredibly lonely at times. And so I think making sure that you have kind of a community can be nice. So ATDC is one of those. And then, there's, GRA from a grant perspective. And then I think for folks in the life sciences space, there's Biolocity, which is a program that provides capital and mentorship and support for, I think it's a 6-month period of time. Leanne, maybe you actually know that better than I do. Those are some of the ones that immediately come to mind. And then from an investor perspective, there is, of course, a local investor community. It's fairly small. I guess, I think coming from the Bay Area, it's maybe a little bit more pronounced in my mind how small it is. Given that, there's other, I think Atlanta and is trying to become a top tech hub, but maybe isn't quite at that level yet. And I think in this ecosystem, there are some pretty pronounced gaps in the local investor base. I think deep tech is an area that is actually not well covered by local investors, which is a little interesting when you think about the strength of Georgia Tech. And so, our fund is, again, small and generalist, but I think we are trying to, in some way, support or plug that little bit of a hole. And I think there are less investors who lead deals than I think there need to be in this ecosystem. And there's less firms that I think are comfortable going in super early, which I think there needs to be more of those as well. So we're trying to, again, in our own little small way for Georgia Tech founders, solve some of those problems. And, if we're successful, we hope to kind of grow this effort beyond where we are now. But those are, and I'm sure I missed a million other support mechanisms in the ecosystem, but those are a few.
I think you did a good job. Some others I was going to mention are Georgia Life Sciences, who has a call out right now for companies to pitch at their bigger annual event. So you might look into that. And then for pediatrics specifically, there's a whole network called the Pediatric Device Consortiums that are funded by the FDA. And they provide some small funding, $25,000 to $50,000 to teams who have pediatric devices specifically that they want to take forward. And they also offer FDA assistance and guidance. And then there's another venture capital company called Springhood Ventures, which specifically focuses on pediatric devices. So just for our audience, if you're looking for things in the pediatric space, those might be some things you want to look into or reach out to us about, and we're happy to talk to you. We do have a couple of questions in the chat, so we're going to go there. From Judd. CreateX offers a 5K safe note to companies participating in the program. Does GT Ventures offer funds to CreateX companies that are above and beyond that 5K mini tranche of money?
Yes. So so the 5K, that is one of the funds that's listed on our website. I think we call it the CreateX Seed Fund. So yes, so for those that aren't familiar, if you go through specifically the CreateX launch program, you are eligible for 5K in funding. That comes in the form of a no discount, no cap safe. If for those where that means anything, I'm happy to explain that if folks are interested. It's essentially very founder-friendly terms, the most founder-friendly terms out there. It's just to really allow our founders to eat, to pay rent, to really focus on, figuring out if, the problem they're solving and what they're building is really worth kind of maybe devoting the next 5, 10 plus whatever years of their life. So it's a little starting point. It's not much, of course, but it's more than zero. And then Judd, to your question. So one of our and so let me back up for a second. So that 5K, that is basically a hand raising process. If you get into launch and you want that money, you basically raise your hand and you get it. I'm not sitting here making investment decisions on a 5K check. So the other two funds that I mentioned at the beginning of the conversation, those ones operate like venture funds, meaning we go through a process. You pitch to a committee, I write memos, we say yes, we say no, we think about financial returns, that kind of stuff. So one of those two funds is focused on CreateX founders. So you can think of that as a continuation, fund for the 5K. A lot of our founders, for whatever reason, while they go through the launch program, don't take us up on the 5K. So it's not a prerequisite that you take the 5K to be considered for the next fund. But the fund that is focused on CreateX writes checks of our range for initial checks to date has been 25K to 200. And then we also reserve capital for follow-ons. So we've done out of that CreateX fund, which if you look at the website, it's called the Tenenbaum Fund. The majority of the capital comes from an individual whose name is Michael Tenenbaum, hence the name. And we've done, I think, 7 or 8 follow-ons at this point, typically in the range of like 100 to 300K.
Wonderful. Okay. And so Mike asks, what do you need to have a productive first conversation, and what should the entrepreneur bring to the conversation?
Yeah. Okay, so I'm not sure if this is specific to us at GTF Ventures or to any, I guess, investor pitch. And it's probably like a similar answer anyway, so I'll answer it as if I were any investor. So I think to have a productive first conversation, most investors will give you 30 minutes. I think it's pretty rare if you're going to get more than that. The reason being, I think you both don't want to be stuck on a call if in the first 5 minutes you find that it's not super relevant. So I think plan for an initial conversation with most investors to be 30 minutes. I try to tell folks, like I don't really care how long your pitch deck is, but however long it is, make sure that you can get through it, assuming no interruptions, in maybe 15 minutes. Some investors will let you go through the whole thing without saying a word, and they'll ask all their questions at the end. Some will interrupt you on every slide. But you definitely want to make sure that you leave room for questions. So I would say in terms of preparation, 15 minutes for your spiel. And then I think just, making sure that you have all of the pieces of the story. And again, it's going to kind of evolve over time as you talk to different investors, and different investors will care about different things in the first meeting. But by and large, what's going to get you to a second meeting is convincing them that the problem that you're solving is worth solving, that you have a unique approach to solve that problem, and that you're the right team to try to tackle the problem. So I think those are some things to get you to a second call.
Okay. And if we're thinking about things like medical devices, since that's what we do at the Pediatric Innovation Network, are there other specific things that might be relevant that investors are looking for, like having a clinician on your team or a patient on your team? Anything else that you can think of?
Yeah, that's a good question. And there are definitely people that would be more equipped to answer this appropriately that, have funds that are specifically focused in this area. We have got like our IP fund. If you take a look at our portfolio, it's pretty concentrated in life sciences unintentionally, but there is a lot of really good stuff coming out of the university. I would say it's always nice to have, clinicians on your team or an advisory board of impressive people, all of that kind of stuff. So I think, that can't hurt. I'm trying to think of investments that we've made, like have all of them had those criteria? Probably not. I think in like a deep tech kind of regulated environment, like convincing folks that you have the expertise yourself, can go get it, have it around the table already, is important. I don't think anybody expects any founder to have every single piece of the puzzle, particularly in the beginning. But like, sharing kind of what you have and being self-aware to what you're going to need to supplement with is probably what I look for, maybe more so than any specific, like, pedigree at the get-go.
Okay. And so we only have a few minutes left, and I don't see any more questions in the chat unless somebody wants to type one in. But is there any advice, like anything else you didn't tell us, any advice you want to give, you know, to a startup, to someone who's trying to move forward or thinking about it?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say, I mean, like the best part of this job for me is when I find founders who are just like, are so obsessed with the problem and they're so passionate about it. And so I think like making sure that whatever, wherever if you decide to, become an entrepreneur, you think you have something interesting or a problem worth solving, like make sure that it's something that you are potentially interested in, you're gonna want to work through all the no's and the ups and downs, and, hopefully some yeses and successes along the way, but, all of that kind of trajectory for, 10 plus years. And if like the thought of like doing what you're doing or some version of that, or working on the same, a problem or, technology for, the next decade doesn't excite you, then maybe it's not the right one. Maybe you need to keep like thinking or iterating. So I think it, it does really shine through, to, I think most good investors, if, a founder is really gonna, want to stick it out. Because I think no startup path is like, just up and to the right. It's always a little bit kind of like that. And so I think
Yeah.
just I would encourage folks to like, it's a really fun journey. I think like, solving a problem that you really care about, like coolest thing in the world, but make sure that like, that's kind of your starting point. Is something that you think can excite you for, years to come.
Yeah. I totally agree with you. So I participate as a judge in a lot of pitch events, and I know that, a lot of people really invest in people as opposed to the
Hmm.
technology, right?
Hmm.
Um, does it excite you? Do
Hmm.
you have the personality to take it forward, and the drive and everything like that? So I completely agree with you that a lot of what you're selling is yourself and your ability to do something
Hmm.
with the technology. And then as
Hmm.
a, from the technology side of things, since that's what I do every day, I love to see that, a technology is real and that it works. I do also like to see if you have that clinician on board or that patient on board, whoever's going to be the end user, just to make sure that it's fits in their workflow, it's something they need,
Hmm.
it's something they want. So I think all of those things are really important. But we are here at the last minute. So I just want to thank everybody for coming today and being a part of our Tech Talk. We will have it up on our website if you'd like to revisit it or share it with somebody else. And Erin, thanks so much for coming today. And I'm really looking forward to everything we can do with the Georgia Tech Foundation Venture Fund and what all it invests in, because I think it's going to be amazing. So thank you so much for being here and doing that.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Thanks everybody for coming, for your questions. Like I said, I'm happy to speak to. I know I've spoken to some of you in the past. I'm happy to speak to anybody about any of this, even if you're not quite sure, you've settled on a startup, or you're just thinking about it at any stage. I'm open to being one of many ears who is excited and happy to help you figure out what might come next. So just
Yep,
feel free to share my email or whatever, Leanne.
absolutely. And yes, and I'm happy to help too, and especially for pediatric specific technologies as you move forward. So we really appreciate it, everyone. Thanks for being here. Thank you.
Thanks everyone.